and bringing some kind of resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Middle East correspondent David Gilbert joins us this morning. Nice to have you here.
Good to see you, Ross.
This is home for you, living in the Bay Area.
You bet.
You grew up here.
City, down the peninsula.
Are you living in the Middle East now?
You bet. Jerusalem since about 2000.
Yeah. You might remember during the Israeli-Lebanese war and all, we talked to David many times by telephone, so it's nice to have you in person. It seems like the president of Iran is always saying that he's calling for the destruction of Israel. Is that bluster, or is there some substance there?
The short answer is it's not bluster. This guy means what he says. He fundamentally believes that this world is temporary, and that in order to get reward in the next world, in heaven as it were, one has to eliminate the infidels. The infidels are you, me, and anybody that's not in Iran for the most part. Ahmadinejad, in fact, said earlier today that he expects there to be a full nuclearization of Iran by March of next year.
Yeah, but he also goes on to say it's strictly for energy reasons. There's no weapons program going on here.
Correct. He continues to maintain that it's for peaceful purposes. They need electricity. They need the ability to provide their people with power. Many analysts, of course, point out that they've got more oil than you and I could ever dream of, and why do they need to spend so much money on nuclear technology when they have so much cheap electricity?
When it gets down to the short strokes, how much power does he really have? And isn't it maybe the clerics that are more in control than he is?
There's no doubt that the clerics control things. However, he is their elected pawn, as it were. So he has influence. He sits on the council of religious clerics and leaders and the like, and he certainly has an influence on their policy thinking. But at the end of the day, you're right. It's the clerics who really call the shots in Iran.
So the Prime Minister of Israel says Israel will not tolerate nuclear or nuclear Iran. What can they do about it?
Well, the Israelis have certainly been upping the rhetoric in recent weeks. For a while, they were keeping a very low profile, looking for a diplomatic option. In recent weeks, the Israeli Deputy Defense Minister, the Prime Minister, and others have been talking about, at least hinting at an attack. There were some more overt comments in the last few days. What can they do? The Israeli military sources that I talk to on a regular basis, many of them point out that, at least quietly, that they don't necessarily have the air power that it would take to eliminate from 50 to 200 military sites, nuclear sites that are in Iran. It's not like the Iraqi reactor in 1981 where it was one reactor, it was well known, it was above ground, they went in with 6 planes and they took it out. This time the thought is that you would need B-52 bombers, bunker busting bombs and the like that only the American military possesses. So ultimately it appears that America would have to get involved in order to truly disarm Iran, at least in the near term.
How much has our going into Iraq affected the power that Iran has in the Middle East?
Look, there's no doubt that the Iranians want to be seen as the leaders of the Middle East. They have a very storied history. The Persian people are great people, they're very, very active in history for hundreds of years.
Westernized in many ways. They like America. They may not like the government, but they like the people.
The individuals there certainly have much more love for America than the leadership does. The leadership has more or less hijacked the country, and there are those that point out that perhaps if somehow the regime could change, the people would welcome us. And of course we heard that with Iraq as well, so it's not clear that that's ultimately going to be true, but there are those that are hopeful that perhaps somehow that regime could go away in Iran and that the people would more or less be friendly towards the American people.
Is it true because of the election last week, the Israeli Prime Minister is a little concerned about the American government now and saying, I think that one of the words used was, will they be a little softer on what's going on in the Middle East because of democratic control?
There was off the record, there was some concern that the Democratic policy is slightly different than the Republican policy vis-a-vis the Middle East, that the Democrats are much more into the idea of pulling out of Iraq much more quickly, and the Israelis view that as weakness in some sense, that if the Americans pull out immediately from Iraq, that the terrorists are going to view that as a victory, that al-Qaeda is going to be emboldened, and it's going to set the rest of the country and the rest of the countries of that region on fire. The other issue, of course, is the Iranian issue, that once the Iranians get nuclear weapons, everybody knows that every other country around the region is going to be trying to get those weapons, and you have sort of a falling cards process where everybody's trying to get these deadly weapons that can, of course, be put in a suitcase and brought to the port of Oakland very easily.
One last question for you before I have to say goodbye. Prime Minister Omar, how popular after this Lebanese-Israeli war is he with his own people?
Terribly unpopular. In fact, he's in Los Angeles. I was just in Los Angeles yesterday. He's there today. He's there because he gets a nice reception when he's at the White House, and he gets a very nice reception when he's in Los Angeles and elsewhere. In Israel, he's got a 20% approval rating. The number 2 in his government has a 15% approval rating. I mean, you can imagine how low the approval rating is. The Israeli people are very disappointed in their leadership in terms of the results of the war with Hezbollah. Mr. Olmert promised a decisive victory, and in fact, some are saying actually Israel lost the war, not just a draw, as it were. So he's very unpopular, and he's doing everything he can to shore up his leadership because he wants to stay in power.
So when you go back to the Middle East, where do you go?
To Jerusalem.
That's home.
That's home.
Nice to have you here this morning.
Good
Enjoy the rest of your stay in the Bay Area. Time now is 8:51. Let's go back to the desk.
9 minutes before 9 o'clock. And